name is Jennifer Walsh, and I'm on a mission to get more people outdoors, to understand and share the health benefits of spending time in nature, to fully comprehend the power that green spaces in nature have on our overall health, well-being, and mental state. We decided to film the entire season at the beautiful wellness community, Serenbe. Their mission is to live and work in harmony with nature, connecting people to nature and each other, so choosing to film in this beautiful place was a perfect fit in every way. The conversations on my walk are open and lively. We speak to a cross-section of industry leaders, people with varied backgrounds, yet all share how their connections and time spent in nature have shaped their life and their work. Join me on a walk with Walsh. This season made possible by Mother Dirt, good bacteria for great skin. Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of A Walk with Walsh, where I am with none other than Richard Louv. Hello Richard.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
I'm so happy you're here today.
Oh, I am too.
I can't even actually describe how happy I am. I've been looking forward to this for so long, and I have been such a fan of your work for years. I might have mentioned to him a little bit that I've been studying and reading his books for so many years, but really your work has changed my life and actually changed the trajectory of my world and everything I've done. That's a lot to put on his shoulders right in the beginning, but I just did it.
Well,
So I'm
thank you.
thrilled you're here to talk about your new book and all the work that you've done. So would you like to go for a walk and we can chat?
You bet.
Wonderful. So there's a lot I want to get to, but first of all, I want to ask you, because I know your connection to nature is so deep-rooted with children and our need to be in nature, but why animals and why now?
Well, I actually was a kid once. And
Weren't we all, right?
I spent much of my boyhood in the woods with my dog. It was a collie named Banner.
Mm-hmm.
And, Banner knew where I was. My parents didn't always.
Sure.
And dogs are, in a way, a bridge to the wild.
Mm-hmm.
Both genetically, but also in that they take us outside.
Yes.
And so Banner and I encountered a lot of animals when we were there, and there weren't that many animals there. This was at the edge of Kansas City. There were
Okay.
squirrels and things like that, but the deer were all hunted out, and I would have given anything to see a bobcat.
Sure.
And but snakes and frogs.
Did you
and
go
all of
searching
that.
for the animals?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I had, in the book I talk about altered states when we're in the presence of other animals, particularly wild animals.
Yes.
And I think I had lots of experiences in which I was, in a sense, in an altered state. It was really there. And this is what I've learned from a lot of the people that I interviewed or that sent me their stories of their encounters and relationships, is that time disappears or time bends.
Sure.
A sense of scale changes. I mean, try watching some ants at their level for a while and you forget
That's so true.
you forget your normal sense of scale. So I had a lot of those experiences, and that at the time I wouldn't have called them spiritual experiences. And I still hesitate to do that now,
Sure.
because people will kind of misjudge what I'm saying, perhaps, even though many of them are spiritual. So that, is that, and then I realized that I had not been having those experiences for quite a while as an adult,
Interesting.
and then I started having them again.
Really?
And
How so?
well, maybe it's the age you're at the time, or you're not as distracted by things that don't matter
Yes.
as you get a little older. But as an example, I was on a lake one day, and I have a little boat and a little electric motor, and I saw what I thought were two vultures on the shore eating a dead carp.
Wow.
And I eased up very carefully
Yeah.
and slowly, and I realized they were not vultures, they were two giant golden eagles.
Oh, wow.
And you don't usually get within 20 feet of golden eagles.
Sure.
So one of them flew up around a peak and came back down. And it seemed like a long time. And again, these altered states,
Makes sense.
time seems to go away, so it may not have been a long time. But we did this. The eagles would look at me, and then they would go down, take a bite of the carp, and then look up at me, and then down,
Wow.
up. And we had that eye contact on and off for, again, a long time. That may have been a short time.
Sure.
And I felt something change in that moment. And I felt something in between the eagles and me. It wasn't just about me. It wasn't just, and I can't speak for the eagles. They may have just been trying to decide if I was edible.
Sure.
And, but it was a really special moment. And I went home. My younger son was home from college then. I told him about this, and I said in so many words, you know, Matthew, whoever I say I am, I'm not. Whoever I was in those moments is who I actually am.
Wow.
And I don't have the words to explain that.
Wow.
This is beyond verbal language. And so this book is kind of a real effort to answer that question. What was that? And so many of the people, many people told me or sent me their stories. And again, that experience comes up. And the closest, one way to look at it is the way that Martin Buber, the great intellectual,
Yes.
that I always have to be careful not to say Justin Bieber, he had a great essay called I and Thou, and he said basically you and I don't exist.
Okay.
What exists is right here. It's a relationship, and without that relationship, we kind of don't exist.
Sure.
And he was talking about a relationship in a little different way than is usually spoken of. He thought it was a kind of electricity
Oh, absolutely.
that some people call God.
Yeah.
Okay. Now he applied that to human beings, and I thought, that's what I felt. That's, in a way, part of at least, what so many people were telling me in their stories that they felt.
Wow.
Whether
and
it was
again,
from
you
their,
kind of felt that.
Pardon me?
Over and over again, you were kind of hearing that same kind of connection.
Yeah, and often people were kind of embarrassed to tell those stories, but they told them, and the more they told them, the more excited they got. And it kind of doesn't matter to me whether that's literally true, and I kind of think it is.
Yeah.
What matters is the meaning that we bring to these relationships with other animals,
Yes.
and they bring to us. And to be aware of that, and that so much of our lives are spent cut off from that.
I think that's what we're missing. You're absolutely right. We're kind of just so in that point of putting ourselves so far away from nature and from living creatures.
Yeah.
You mentioned something in the book about habitat of the heart. Can you go into a little bit further about that? Because that really kind of struck me. Something really beautiful.
That thing
Yes.
here between me and the eagles, or someone else with their dog, or someone else with an octopus. There's a great story about it, an octopus in the story.
I love that story, by the way.
That thing between us that Buber talked about, I call the habitat of the heart. That it's its own thing.
Yeah.
And that there are two habitats, there are two environments that we live in to a degree. One is the physical habitat, which is all around us, and we work very hard to protect that, many of us. And then there's this second habitat, the habitat of the heart. We don't do very much to preserve that. If one of those habitats goes, so does the other one.
Of course.
So, I make the argument that in environmentalism, in our relationship with the earth, we have to pay a lot more attention to that habitat.
I agree, because I think it's unfortunately going away. So how do we then get more children and more adults to understand that importance, that we can't take away the importance of animals in our daily lives? Even what I was just telling you before we went on camera, just being here at Serenbe, I feel such a connection to the animals because I no longer have one, living in New York City.
Yeah.
So when I come here, the first thing I do is run to the farm to see the animals.
Yeah.
So how do we bring that awareness?
Well, I think one of the most direct ways are ancestors did naturally, which is we tell stories. You know, there's a lot of science in the book. This isn't just based on anecdotal evidence, but you know, our ancestors went out, and many of them, of course, hunted.
Yeah.
And then they would come back to the campfire, and then they would tell their stories of what their encounters with animals that day.
Sure.
And they would act out the stories.
Yeah.
They would become the bear. Right? And we do that today, ironically, around an electronic campfire. You know, I don't think it's an accident there are so many YouTube videos of animals.
Of animals. You're right. You're right.
Particularly YouTube videos of unlikely alliances between animals of different species.
You're absolutely right.
We're telling ourselves a story with that.
Yeah.
We're telling ourselves a story of the way we would like life to be.
No, it should be.
And yes, there's a lot of, you know, gruesome animal videos out there too, but there's so many of that other kind. But I would make the argument we need to tell these stories to each other. Families need to tell these stories around the kitchen table and the family room. And when we tell those stories, they gather meaning over time.
You mentioned something else in the book too about co-becoming.
Yeah.
Can you discuss a little bit what that means?
Well, first,
for
it's
us?
great that you read the book so carefully. I really appreciate that.
I've consumed almost all your books, except for maybe one or two from the
Oh,
80s.
thanks.
But I wasn't
Yeah.
joking when I said the highlights. I'll show you later all the highlighted pages in all the books.
Oh, well,
But
that's
no, I
great.
think there's just so many interesting parts that you bring up.
By the way, I love it when I'm signing books and somebody brings me up an old book to sign,
Yes.
and it's filled with yellow markers and underline, and I like it best when it looks like it's fallen in water.
You'll see that later from mine.
Okay, well that means one of two
I
things.
brought them with me.
Either they were outside and it fell in the stream, or they were reading it in the bathroom. And either
Maybe I
way,
didn't do
I'm
either
happy
of
about
those,
that.
but yeah. They're well worn for sure. So yes, onto unbecoming or co-becoming. I'm really fascinated by that idea.
Well, we've all heard of coevolution, and for instance, with all dogs came from gray wolves, and they have co-evolved with us for tens of thousands of years.
Yeah.
There's no accident that we are so intuitively close with dogs. That took a long time to develop.
Sure.
But what I refer to, or what I call co-becoming, is what you do, even with the animals up here that you've just met.
Yeah.
They're changing you just in those minutes, and you're changing them. If you grow up with a dog, like I grew up with Banner and I co-became. We were about the same age.
Wow.
And by the time he died around 11, you know, there was a bond there, a permeability. One woman in Toronto told me about her son and their big dog named Jack, 6-year-old son. And she walks into the living room one day and she sees her son stretched out on the carpet and Jack stretched out in front of him. And Jack has, her son has his arm around Jack.
Wow.
Very quiet, sitting, laying there. And she hears her son say, "I don't have a heart anymore."
Oh.
And she's, "What are you saying?" And her son says, "My heart is in Jack." Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And so
That kind of statement makes me want to cry because I can understand that feeling.
yeah,
I can feel that.
permeability. And we can also have that feeling with wild animals, even though it will likely be a lot shorter in duration. But the intensity of that, people feel when they start noticing how they're relating to other animals. They feel that, they notice that, and they want more of it.
Yes.
And the co-becoming is we literally co-become each other.
Do you think people are fearful of animals and that's why we're kind of separating ourselves or have separated ourselves from animals? Is there a sense of being afraid of the woods and people are teaching children to fear these animal connections?
Right. Well, first, you know, I never say that nature is safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of its attractions.
You never know.
I met a lot of snakes, including poisonous snakes, when I was a kid, and I thought that was great.
Did any of them bite you? Are you okay?
The non-poisonous did.
Okay, well that's good. That's good.
Yeah, and they. By the way, a non-poisonous snake can actually make you sick too. More snakes than we know, or that we usually talk about, have venom. Garter snakes have a little bit of poison, but it's meant for other animals, so we don't really feel it. But in any case, there's lots of reasons to be afraid of nature, and in fact, as I say, that's one of the attractions. That's one of the things that makes us feel alive.
Yeah.
If you're in the presence of an apex predator, you feel quite a bit more alive.
That adrenaline flows.
However, what does happen, though, is, and David Sobel at Antioch talks about this, at a very young age, kids, even before they ever have a chance to feel a sense of joy in the natural world, kids start being told about climate change,
Yes.
when they're 3 years old, and basically being given the message that because of climate change and natural disasters and all of this, the world is ending and nature is ending. Now, if you get that message over and over again, and David Sobel calls this Eco Phobia.
Eco Phobia.
If you get that over and over again, in the absence of any kind of joyful experience in nature to balance that, for the rest of your life, you will associate nature with disaster and the end of things. That sets these kids up, along with their parents' fear of stranger danger from other humans, to not want to go outside.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be very careful. That doesn't mean we don't need to talk about the climate emergency and all of the other environmental threats to kids, but we need to be careful how we do that and make sure that they have this balancing experience of a connection to the rest of the world, the rest of nature.
That's so important. You're absolutely right. The ecophobia, I've never heard of that, but that makes such a good point, because even for myself living in New York, I hear even adults that don't go outside, they're not even outside the park, because they've heard of things from their parents or loved ones about it being dangerous, or
I have to tell you, we have to be careful with this, because some neighborhoods it's not at all safe. Others there are. The truth is that in terms of stranger danger, that the violence toward children outside the home has been going down for about 4 decades. That's not true of violence inside the home. What's been going up is the 24-hour coverage of a relative handful, and one is too many, cases of child abduction or some other kind of violence toward a child by strangers outdoors. The coverage itself, which is magnified far beyond the actual statistical reality, is conditioning us, both parents and kids, to live in a state of fear. And that's a problem, because if you think about where the real risk is, yes, there's a risk outdoors, but there's a real risk of growing up on a couch. The child obesity affects a life for the rest of life.
Absolutely.
And is attached to all kinds of other diseases. That's a real risk. So rather than raising our kids under protective house arrest, we might want to think in terms of comparative risk. I have a saying in one of the books is one of the things about kids climbing trees is that there's a child psychologist, famous one, who says the reason they fall out of the tree is because they don't have the upper body strength. They don't have the upper body strength to hang on to the limb. So don't cut down the tree, build up the kid. This is an opportunity for resilience, to build strength.
That is such an impactful point, because I know you've talked to this topic in all of your books about the sense of loneliness, that we're in a point of almost an epidemic of loneliness. Children, adults, we're isolating ourselves more and more from one another, and of course all living things. So whether it be being outside in nature or living creatures, we're just not associating with anything that's
Some
living.
nice deer tracks here.
I know, aren't they? It's
Yeah.
pretty neat. That's like, so you're funny. This is what I do. When I grew up, even in New York, I would always look to see what the tracks were. They horse tracks, or
Yeah.
especially when it would snow, I'd always try and find it. So,
Yeah.
see, we're kindred spirit, Richard. Kindred.
Yeah.
So,
the issue of loneliness is
Loneliness.
a central topic in Our Wild Calling in the new
Mm-hmm.
book. The medical folks have been talking for some time about what they call an epidemic of loneliness in the world, of social isolation. Now, epidemic may or may not be too strong a word, but it's growing. And what their feeling is now among many medical people, health-related people, is that loneliness is about to surpass obesity as a cause of early death. It's
Wow.
associated with many diseases, not just suicide, but many diseases.
surpass obesity.
Yeah, and
Oh, gosh.
and I make the argument in the new book that I believe, and this is speculation on my part, but I believe that human loneliness comes from a lot of directions.
Sure.
Too much time on FaceTime, and there have been
Yes.
studies on that. But it comes, I believe, and is deeply rooted in species loneliness,
Oh, okay.
our disconnection from other life. And that the farther we move away from the rest of life, and perhaps particularly animals, though this is true of plants as well, our pathologies get worse. Our sense of disconnection becomes deeper. The parks, the urban parks that have the highest benefit for human psychological well-being happen to be the parks with the highest biodiversity.
It's fascinating.
I don't think that's any accident. We are desperate not to feel alone in the universe.
Yeah.
This is part of the source of religion. I think it's also broader even than that. We don't want to be alone in the universe. Why else would we look for Bigfoot? Why else would we
True.
look for
Good point.
life on other planets, intelligent life, which
know.
Stephen Hawking tells us may not be a good idea?
Yeah.
And why else would we do that? Why are we so desperate to find other? And the irony is that we are surrounded by intimacy. We are surrounded by other life. And we have a larger family in which we live. And I make the case in the book that to the degree that we reattach ourselves to our larger family, or what my older son calls the neighborhood of animals
Okay.
that exists right here,
Yeah.
the less lonely we are. That moment when I was looking at the eagles and they were looking at
Yeah.
me, during that kind of moment, it is, I think, literally impossible to feel alone, to be lonely. It's
Agreed.
literally impossible during those seconds or minutes.
Yeah.
So that, if we can increase that kind of positive connection, and this is true for our kids and us, this is a pretty direct and drug-free way
Yes.
to deal with our deep sense of disattachment with the world and with each other. And one of the ironies is people who are working in nature connection. There's a guy that I write about who teaches people bird language, takes them out in the woods. He and others report that when people learn how to do this, they go home and they treat their wife or husband better
Yeah.
because they actually listen to them.
That's
And they
amazing.
they hear this again and again from people who have learned about nature connection, about connection with other animals.
On that note, too, didn't you say somewhere that it's now like one of the hottest trends for millennials or something? Bird song, or listening to birds? Like that's an unexpected.
Yeah.
Young people are now seeking.
There are more dogs than ever before per capita in North America. In Toronto, the city planner of Toronto told me there's more dogs there than children.
Really?
And that's evidence, again, I think, of this species loneliness, is
Yes.
what I call it. I
Yeah.
think that is evidence of that. Millennials are particularly attracted to having dogs. Some people theorize this is because childbearing has been delayed several
Sure.
years from earlier generations. Whatever reason it is, we need to do that. Much more is known about companion animals than is known about wild animals in terms of our communication with them and our attachment to them. There's really not much study. Much of the research on children in nature that I've reported on in previous books, almost all of that is about green space.
Sure.
Is about the effect of trees and green space, which is phenomenal, the effect it has on us. There's not very much on the wild animal that walks through here, on its effect. I think that when that happens, it can be a really intense high dose
Absolutely.
of what we need most that we get just by being around trees. But that high dose, that connection to another animal, when we look at their eyes and we enter another parallel world, their world. It's different from ours. It's not our world. It's we can't project ourselves onto that. That's the worst kind of anthropomorphism. But it's another world, and we live in this universe of attachment. And some of that is a deep intimacy, and in the book I call it the whisper. It's all around us all the time. And some people are really good at this, and they call them horse whisperers.
Yes.
But we're all horse whisperers. We're all animal whisperers if we listen.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, do you find, because I found this fascinating living in New York City, that when you walk down the street, humans will not look at humans, but dogs will look straight in your eye when you walk by. And I notice it every day, all day long, that dogs will look up at you almost for a reassurance or a hello, and humans will keep their eyes down on their phones, or they're just looking in a totally different direction.
That's really interesting.
I never noticed that before, except in New York, because everyone's walking and the dogs are walking very joyfully and gleefully walking, and it's that connection with the dog every time. The human, no, but the dog, yes.
Right.
So I never knew that was something.
Well, here's something that most people don't know that I learned when I was researching the book. When dogs look at a human being, they do what human beings do. They look at the left eye first.
Okay.
And they've done videos and slowed it down. And they see where the eyes are going. Only dogs do that. No other animal does that with us. Wolves don't do that with us, even though dogs are descended from wolves.
Only dogs.
We do that with dogs. And this is evidence of the coevolution that we've experienced. I always felt that the way that Banner, my dog, when I was a kid, looked at me, I have a line in the book, which is that Banner saw me the way I wanted to be seen. And he expected me to live up to what he saw.
I love that.
That kind of connection is, how do we value that more? How do we have, our schools teach about that. How do we have
Absolutely.
That be more of a part of our whole family and our neighborhoods?
And it's so important. I just, like I told you before, I miss that interaction with my dog every day that I don't have her anymore. And it's really a raw feeling. It's really, for the first few months, it took a while for me to get past that every day of having her around. But even now, my life is so different without having that interaction with that creature that I took residence with for a long time. That was I called her my co-pilot in life. And we understood each other without even having to speak. We could just look at each other's eyes, which sounds weird probably to many, but I knew when she couldn't walk anymore. She just could look at me, and I knew she couldn't walk up the steps just by her giving me a look. And I knew she had a pain in her ear, and it was just like a look that she gave me. I know it sounds weird, but it was this connection that I can't describe to anybody.
Outside Magazine just did a profile of me in the new book, and they said it's at times I sound a little new agey. Now, I grew up in Kansas and Missouri. I don't do new age, I thought, but I'll fess up. There's there is something spiritual about that, but there's also something else going on, which is in the book I call it the oldest language. Pre-verbal language are behaviors and movements and looks in the eye sounds, that's that whisper. That's going on it's going on right now around us, the birds up there.
Yes, I could hear them.
And we do it with each other. We're communicating all the time, even when we're not using words, of course. Well, we're doing the same thing with all the animals around us and trees. More that in plants, the more that research shows about trees is that they communicate with each other in really interesting ways. A slower bandwidth than what we use, but they communicate with us. So this is going on all around us. And it's, it's not so much New Age as it is the reality of pre-verbal communication. And when we listen to that and watch that and use all of our senses, human beings, the people who study human senses no longer talk about 5 senses or 4 senses.
Yeah.
They talk at a minimum of 9 or 10 human senses, and some of them talk about as many as 30 human senses.
Wow.
And most of those we block out. The more we use screens, the more we block them out. So
Do you hear that, people? We have to stop using the screens all the time. We need to use our senses.
I'm not anti-tech, but the
Just
more...
less of it, maybe.
Pardon me?
Less of it.
Yeah.
Less of it.
Yeah. Or to balance it with more nature. There's a phrase in the Nature Principle, one of the other books, which is the more high-tech our lives become, the more nature we need.
I might have read it 1 or 2 times.
As you know, it's an equation. It's a budgeting issue of time and money, and that's true of families and schools and so forth. If we balance the downside of technology with more nature, and we're going to get more technological, so we better have more nature.
Yeah.
Then the kids will do okay, and we'll do okay.
Well, you say something really interesting. You've always said, and I've always believed this, and I feel it so deeply that I've shared it with Felipe and Monica, who are behind the camera right now, that you've always said, and I always teach this when I lead people on walks, you can't protect that which you do not know, understand, or love, or spend time in. So how do you protect nature? How do you protect connection to animals if you're not willing to spend any time in it?
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because with the new book and the others, but maybe particularly with this one, it can be misinterpreted as being only what we get out of nature. And it almost could be interpreted as turning nature into a commodity.
Absolutely.
And that's not what I'm saying. In fact, I don't see, as you said, any way that we're going to deeply care about nature and protect it unless we are far more aware of it in our lives, get more of it into our lives, connect with animals on their terms, not just ours, and love it. We only protect what we love.
Absolutely. Well, I know you're on limited time. I could talk to you all day long. Is there anything else you wanted to finish up with before we wrap for the day?
I think that's it. I think it'd be really interesting if some of your viewers and could tell their stories in some fashion.
I would love that. Yeah, we'll actually definitely ask everyone who has tuned in to definitely share your story and let us know what you think about the book. And Richard, thank you for your time. I honestly could talk to you all day. There's a million more things I'd like to ask you, but that'd be for maybe the next one.
Okay.
Well,
you're
the
great,
next walk.
and I really admire what you do. You're so independent, and you're so conscious with your business and with your personal relations. I think that's terrific.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your ever-growing sense of the importance of how we have to be one with ourselves, with our community, and of course with nature and animals, and I so appreciate the time that you give to us today.
One thing I'd like to add
is
that this is a happy cause.
Yes.
Wherever I go around the country, I meet a lot of people who are working in camps or nature connection programs or whatever, particularly with children. I have yet to meet someone who is unhappy doing that work. Now, they're not paid as much as they should be, but whether it's a teacher or the camp counselor or the person who works at a nature center and gets kids outdoors and families, and from every kind of background. And one of the arguments I make in the book, and I made in a recent Sierra magazine article, which is that this should be considered a human right. That if all of it's gone from about 60 studies when I wrote Last Child in the Woods to probably now over 1,000 studies, and they're still coming in from somewhere in the world, 10 or 15 a month. If all of that is true, and it all seems to point in the same direction, then this is fundamental to our humanity, to who we are.
Absolutely.
And anything that is fundamental to our humanity in a positive sense, we should consider a human right. Along with that right always comes a responsibility to take care of what it is that gives us that gift. So it's a two-way street. Until it's seen as a human right for children, for adults, all of us, that nature connection, a positive nature connection, will patronize that idea. We'll pat it on its head and send it on its way. We'll see it as a nice to have and not a have to have. And the more the research comes in, the more it's clear that this is a have to have. And this is not new knowledge. This is ancient knowledge that we have forgotten.
Absolutely. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks.
Don't forget to pick up the copy, Our Wild Calling. I highly recommend it. Again, thank you, Richard. And thank you all for tuning in. We'd love your comments, your feedback. Please share. Let us know what you think. And until next time, we'll see you soon. This episode of A Walk with Walsh wouldn't be possible without our sponsor, Mother Dirt. Learn more about all their great products.
Clean. We create habits around this word from the moment we're born. We clean ourselves, our kids, our homes, our environment so that we can be healthy. Are we? Are clean and healthy starting to become two different things? What about the kind of clean that comes with healthy, with being human, with thriving? Maybe that clean is something different.
And I want to thank our season partners, the Inn at Serenbe and Igni Productions. Continue the conversation by subscribing to our YouTube channel and the companion podcast available at Apple Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. See you next Wednesday for more walks.